welcome to the Monopath podcast. I'm speaking with Lauren Orty today, who goes by the name Bimmling. Lauren's an animator, a 2D animator, so we begin the conversation by outlining the different types of animation. Lauren's actually the first animator on the podcast, although I seem to know quite a few people in the business, so hopefully it won't be the last. So we spent a decent amount of time combing through the nomenclature of animation, terms like referencing that may seem more familiar to people, it was to me, and others like readability, which were a little less so, as well as inventing a few of our own in the midst of the conversation. So I'd been reading a little bit about political theory recently. I'm currently writing my master's dissertation on blame, on the philosophy of blame, which is not something too many people have considered or written about. Anyway, given my research there, I came across a term called the Overton Window. And in political theory, that window is used to describe the range of policies that are in accordance with public opinion, so they seem viable. Policies that fall outside of the window are those that seem too outrageous, a little too extreme. And I read that and felt that there was some correlation to what I'm talking about with creativity on the podcasts. There was some application for it, and I still think that's so. I'm not sure how clear I was with it here, chatting to Lauren. You can be the judge of that, I suppose. But in any case, I think I'll keep using it until I can make it a little clearer. And as I said in the podcast, this is one of the virtues of having conversations like this, is I can explore some of these principles and themes that otherwise would be left fairly blurry in the background of my mind. It's quite nice to bring them into the foreground and add a little detail to these ideas and these concepts. And I hope that doing that is as useful for you, the listener, as it is for me, the one doing that. Okay, last off, I always have to say these things, but if you are enjoying the podcast, if you're listening to this, if this is not the first time you've listened to the podcast, then I do encourage you to support it. You don't have to do much, actually. I think the best way, and the way that most people seem to be doing it, is by buying some tea from Arthur Dove Tea Co., which is the tea business that I'm running. That helps me an awful lot too, and you get some tea. Everybody is a winner. You really can't complain with that. That being said, if you think that what I'm doing here is enough and you want to reward this sort of content, then you can visit the Support Me tab on my website, which is arthurjohndove.com, and do something there. And that's all. So, without labouring over this any further, I bring you Lauren Orty. Lauren, welcome to the podcast.
Cool. Hi. Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Everybody still finds that strange and laughs at the beginning of it because it's a bit weird.
Yeah, it's always like it's like a weird jump point. Like, oh, okay, right, it's now, right, okay, we're here.
Yeah, we're live.
Yeah, yeah.
So you are the first animator that I am speaking to on the podcast.
Oh,
I wondered
cool.
if you could clarify something. What is the difference really between what you do as an animator and what somebody else does who just does non-animated design?
I guess the difference is I make things move. So you can have different kinds of animators. And that's not to say like it's one particular thing. You can have a motion graphics animator or a 3D animator, a visual effects animator, and what I primarily do is 2D animation. And yeah, so yeah, we make things move and make cartoons or like, make things quite realistic, but it's all computer generated kind of thing.
Yeah, so 2D animation is not the same as cell animation. It's the thing that came after that. That's right, isn't it? So
Yeah,
the sort of
like-
thing you'd expect to see on Disney.
Yeah. So I can do cell animation. So the program I work in is called ToonBoom Harmony, and you can do like hand-drawn cell stuff. But with this technology now, you can make what is called a rigged character, and that would be like basically creating. You'd have the drawing of the character, and then you add bones to it, so then you can animate it. And yeah, that's the kind of stuff you'd see. On like Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, stuff like that. You'd see a lot of their 2D shows would be in ToonBoom with that rigged style, that flat style.
So I'm maybe being a bit dim-witted here, but so what's the main difference between that with the kind of rigged? You said adding bones to it as well. What's the distinction between those two? I don't think I understand.
So like so cell animation, that's like kind of the traditional animation where it's like you are drawing every single frame kind of thing. So like you draw the character, then go to the next frame, draw it again, go to the next frame, draw it again, and then it creates a moving image. Whereas using rigged animation, and this is kind of similar in 3D stuff as well, where you'll take, but in my expertise 2D, you'll have so you'll have the drawing of the head, the head of the character, then you'll have, let's say, the torso, and then you'll have on each side the top half of their left arm, top half of the right arm, lower half of each arm, and then the hands and fingers. And they'll all be like separate elements. And then what you get the computer to do is you add what is called rigging bones. So you tell the computer where the pivot point is. So in my wrist here, I know I've got a camera on so you can see, but like in your wrist there's a pivot point. That's how you can move your hand left to right. And you put a pin there. So then in the computer you can grab the hand and make it move. So you'll have a pinpoint in your wrist, pinpoint in the elbow, pinpoint in the shoulder. And then what you do is, in animation, we have what we call a timeline. And then, so on frame 1, we'll put the arm, let's say the arm, in its position. And then you'll move across to, let's say, frame 60 and move it. And then along the timeline, when you play it, it will move. And that is the very simple version of what animation is. With that kind of rigged structure. So yeah, if you do that and then obviously apply what we call animation principles, so understanding how movement works and squash and stretch, stuff like that, you can make something that should look living and breathing, you know?
I get you. So it's almost like, I mean, maybe, I hope this is right, and then I'll understand. You will shortly, it'll be revealed whether I do or do not. But is it that there's an algorithm in place that's kind of filling in the gaps between one movement and another, like point A and point B.
Yeah.
Whereas usually you would have had to fill in or redraw that animation point every single time. So it's like, instead of having, I suppose it would be better to say A to Z.
Yes.
And instead of A to Z being filled with a new image for every letter of the alphabet that you have to draw from scratch, it's simply A to Z is just one thing.
Yeah. The computer has filled it in. It's so difficult to explain this because I think a big misconception is that computer animation makes it easy, and it does in that sense. Like it, because then it allows you to concentrate on the movement rather than concentrating on like, oh my god, I've got to get this drawing of A B C D E F like correct. You can concentrate more on the design of the pose and the movement, and you can go in between, and it allows you to be more detailed in the movement. So you can still work just as hard, you know, but it doesn't. It just cuts out that extra like grunt work, I guess is a good way to put it. But yeah, that's basically what it does. The computer figures out the in-between for you, and then you can concentrate on, oh, it needs to move slower, so let's change it a bit. And you know what I mean? It's figuring it out.
Yeah, there's some creative liberation there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because instead of having to do trial and error through I don't know, drawing every single different iteration of a character's position, you can just simply have it on a computer screen, and I imagine it's just sort of point and click, move the arm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like you move the arm around, and then you'll play it, and it's like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's try moving it here instead. And that gives you a bit more freedom to like, oh, let's mesh it around a bit, rather than, oh my god, I've got to redraw that now because it went wrong. You know what I mean? Gives you a lot more room to play around.
So do you feel like you use that freedom? Like, how does that affect workflow?
It affects work. There can be two ways about it, because obviously, like I said, you can keep playback and it's like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, let's move this around and mesh this around. But sometimes there's a term that's used where you can be like a slave to the playback, and you're constantly checking, check, play for such minor changes. And a good working practice in animation is like, you should do, like, if you have a checklist of fixes that you have in your shot, you should like look through them and maybe tick them off, rather than doing one at a time and checking the playback, because you won't even see the work you're doing. You know what I mean? You won't. But if you do the big list, finish that list, and then look at it, and it's like, oh, okay, now I can see the difference. Yeah, because you can get trapped in fixing one fix, and you'll just keep checking, and yeah.
This to me sounds familiar. When I used to mix records, it was always a thing, because you could do anything. You know, you can change any frequency, you can equalize it in any way you desire. You can practically do anything where you know, previously you would have reams and a wall of analog outboard equipment that you would have to put the sound through and run the signal physically through that equipment and back into something. It meant you had to make these conscious choices before you would play around with those things. You already had an idea of what you were going to do and where you were going to run the audio and where the signal was going to go and where it was going to come back. And so you had to start with the idea of what it was going to sound like. Whereas now, the technology in the box, they call it, and all of it's software-based instead, means running signal through some kind of processor is a matter of seconds. So you can just do anything. And that's a very different psychology going into that creative experience, because when you've got that complete freedom, you've got a different set of problems, I think, because for you, I guess it's the difference between cell animation and 2D motion animation, is that you're almost making those choices by necessity, because you're having to draw them frame by frame, and it's too laborious to keep going back and tweaking and changing. Whereas if you don't have that problem of the time, you're saving so much time, I should say, that all of a sudden you could spend all of that excess time just tweaking and noodling.
It can force you to be.
It's the same with making records.
Yeah, it can force you to be a perfectionist, and I think that's what's beautiful about cell animation, is when it is so rough, and it's like, you know, obviously you still got to fix things if something doesn't work, but once you've got it, like this flowing motion, it's like, right, it's there, done. You know what I mean? It's like, but I think with rigged computer animation, it can force you to like, okay, get this perfect. Whereas drawing, it can feel so much more like sketchy, and like, if there is a mistake, that's almost like part of it, I guess. There's been times where I've like drawn a pose. I think I'd like to clarify that maybe this isn't like the same with other animators, but a lot of my rough like cell animation is really like, sometimes you can get a broken pose, but it works. You know what I mean? Like when you play it works. So it's like, cool, right? Let's keep going. You know what I mean? Whereas I think, computer animation can make you a bit more of a perfectionist.
When you were learning how to animate, was cell animation something that you began with, or is something that's considered more advanced than 2D?
Yeah, because I come from more of a drawing and draftsmanship background, so I also do like concept art and storyboarding in animation. So I come from a really draftsmanship background. So to me, traditional animation feels very natural, and it was that was my first step. And then I would go into, so I started looking at ToonBoom Harmony. There's other programs you can look at, After Effects as well for motion graphics. And in 3D aspects, that would be like Autodesk Maya. And for me, it was harder to learn the technology. I'm good at the technology, but like I'm not super tech savvy. I really had to knuckle down and figure it out, and that can be a bit difficult, I think, for me. Whereas you can get animators that, let's say, that work in a 3D and more technical aspect, and they come from a more technical background, and then they realize, oh God, I've got to get good at anatomy, drawing, draftsmanship to understand how to animate this character, and that's where they would struggle. So a lot of animators come from different like areas and different sides. So it's different for everyone.
I do ask for a reason. I just wondered if there was. Well, it seems to me there are different skills in play for both of those things that you've got to utilize in cell animation. You would think it's about, you've got to have this mental picture of it before you put pen to paper.
Yeah,
You've got to know what you're drawing, and you've got to be able to visualize that quite clearly, you would think, compared to what you were doing in 2D, which is less about that clarity. I think it's still important, but you're not developing the skill in the same way. I think you've already developed it at that stage in cell animation. It seems like in 2D, you're developing a skill that's something like the avoidance of perfectionism, like knowing when to stop.
I think a rigged character, like, it allows you to fiddle. That's the problem. Whereas drawing cell animation is yeah, you're right. You do have to like visualize it, but it's kind of the same in rigged animation, because your animation isn't very good if it's not got a strong pose. That's a really key thing about animation. So if you can't visualize that, what makes a good silhouette, or like what can make the character look really strong, you can struggle. So it is good to have those. That's why they say it's good to be good at like anatomy drawing and life drawing to understand how body mechanics work and stuff. It's a plus. You know, obviously you can learn the technical, you can learn the software and you know, which is very important. But if you don't have, sometimes you can find it difficult. Like it's not to say that you would be a bad animator, but you would find probably easier to work with if you had the draftsmanship skills, if that makes sense. So it all melds together. Like they say you can't just like be good at one thing. Sometimes it's good to have that whole knowledge of, you know, characters and drawing and
there's a web of skills there, no doubt.
Yeah, things like that.
I wondered, one of the things that interests me in all these conversations on the podcast really is what's going on in people's heads.
Yeah.
Like, what do they see? What are they experiencing when they're doing the thing that they do? And how is that different to if I tried to do it? And I wonder for you, like, how long have you felt like I can draw?
Oh, I'd say since like, honestly, like as long as I can remember, like definitely like since school, like young school, you know. I would always be the one that's like, you know, like when you're in like year 5 or something and someone's like, oh my God, I can't draw this cat, I can't get the face right, and somehow you'd have a queue of kids coming up to your desk because it's like, well, you can draw like that cat or that boot really well, can you do it in my book as well? And you find yourself, you know, doing the same bloody drawing like over and over again and like stuff like that. So yeah, I felt like and not that I was Mozart, by the way, like back when I was a kid, like but I felt like I've wanted to draw and that I can draw like all my life because I've just always loved doing it.
I know I have a memory that was brought back to me fairly recently. My parents found some pictures that I had drawn when I was in Scotland on a holiday.
Aww.
When I was maybe about 7 years old, 8 years old, quite young. I mean, I have no idea how young I was. I was young enough though.
Yeah.
And I have them in, I think they are, maybe they're in the boot of my car or something. I don't know where I've put them. They just kind of got left somewhere. But the drawings were incredible. I can't
Oh,
draw like
yeah.
that now.
Yeah.
But I'd drawn animals, and I remember how I used to do it. And for me, it was a case of I would have to have the image there in front of me. So I couldn't take it from any mental picture. There was nothing going on in my head. I had to see it in front of me, and then I would replicate that elsewhere. So it wasn't tracing it directly, layered one on top of the other. It was more like traced side to side.
Really taking reference.
Not,
Yeah.
yeah. I had just wondered if I assume for you it must be different.
It is. This is actually. So my partner is a 3D animator, and she can be very reference heavy, and sometimes she has to learn to step away from the reference and like, okay, I need to start like getting creative with these poses or else they're going to look really robotic. Whereas I cannot use reference enough. I have to learn to like, okay, I need to take reference to make sure that what I am creating, whether it's drawing or animation, makes sense. Like I can sometimes back away from reference and take it from my head too much. And, it's so they're skills in themselves, doing both. And I think the sweet spot is being able to like, conjure up what you want to conjure up. Like, oh, I have an idea for this in my head. But sometimes you could never get it, like really hit it until you look at reference at, and, get the body proportions correct or the hand position correct. There's only so much sketching you can do before you're like, okay, this isn't working and I need to figure out how this would actually work properly to sell it to the audience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I do.
Yeah.
Is it something like how a musician would change or maybe they would manipulate their abilities and given the music they listen to? So to give an example, if I am a child and I'm growing up listening to music, whatever music that is going to influence the kind of music I might be interested in writing at some point later on down the line. And it's almost like when I first started playing instruments, I would cover other bands. I'd pick up a bass guitar and I would just figure it out by ear or tablature, and I would just play along. That seems very similar.
Yeah.
In principle, like I'm referencing to a piece of music that is pre-existing and trying to take something from it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you can't say that you come up with something completely 100% plucked it from your brain and it's perfect. I think that's I feel like that's just too perfect. No one can really do that. You are always taking in things, whether it's from other creators or whether it's from real life. Do you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't be able to create a creature. Let's say you've been commissioned to design a creature for a video game, and it has to be a fantasy creature, but you wouldn't be able to figure that out without looking at an encyclopedia of animals and figure out, well, how would a lion stand? How does a bird fly? How does the body mechanics of a flamingo work? And no matter what you do, you're always having to absorb things, and in my opinion, you're a better artist for absorbing things. And obviously you need to be creative, like, you can't be a robot that just sucks in things and spits out the same thing, but you can't be creative without having something to play with. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I think sometimes artists can get like on art Twitter particularly, sometimes people can get high and mighty about like, oh, I drew this without reference. And it's like, well, drawing with reference isn't a bad thing either. Like, don't downplay other artists that like prefer to use reference for a pose or whatever. It's okay. Like, it's not a bad thing trying to figure it out, or else how are you going to get better? Like, if you don't see what the real thing looks like and play with it or something like that.
I draw this distinction between something being intuitive or intellectual.
Right.
And that being the kind of the source of something creative. In this case, I really think with the referencing thing, I think an intellectual reference would be when you do what I did, which is you kind of look at something that's right in front of you and you're seeing it and you're thinking about it. You know, you're not plucking it out of thin air. It's literally there in front of you and it's going into your mind and then back out straight away. Whereas intuitive just feels like it's doing exactly the same thing, except instead of having it right in front of you, it was right in front of you at some point.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just not there right now.
Yeah.
But
you're better at that because let's say you drew the lion from reference the first time, then you draw it again, and because of the things you've learned from taking reference, you are better at drawing the one from your head, because it's like, oh, I remember the nose shape was this because I was learning when you drew that. So yeah, I think both are very important. I think like that's the only way you're going to get better.
There's been no point in any of the conversations that I've had on the podcast that anybody has really said anything other than you need both of those things. And my attitude towards it is that they do necessarily feed back one into the other in the ways that you were just saying. And it's like, had I maintained that pursuit of referencing, literally intellectually referencing as I just described it, if I'd maintained that pursuit, at some point I wouldn't have had to do that, and I would have had some kind of intuitive reference where I could just draw from a state that feels like I'm plucking it out of thin air. But that feeling is probably an illusion, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. And it's just your brain, like, it's the same thing with, creating a magical creature. It's like your brain is starting to pick from the things that you've learned and the things that you've picked up, and then pushing it all out to make something really cool, probably, you know.
I heard, like most things, I'm not very good at remembering names or specifics. I just know at some point I've heard it.
Neither am I.
But I heard this idea that dragons came from this sort of process where it was a combination, designing of something picked from different animals that we were scared of, or different properties that we were scared of, like we evolved to be a bit terrified of. So one of them was a snake, because we do have a kind of preternatural disposition against snakes. We don't, I mean, although people have pets of them now and we've kind of coming to terms with snakes, most of us have some kind of intuition that they're a bit like, oh, I'm a bit
freaked out. Don't
know. And you would evolve to, as a species, to feel that way. You should do, because they bite you and they can kill you. And that kind of makes sense. The same sort of thing with spiders and things. But in the case of the dragon, I think it was supposed to be a composite of a snake and I think like birds of prey. I think was the other one, which is why it was winged.
Yeah.
Because they would, large birds of prey could kind of swing down and kill your cattle or your herd, or swoop away and take children and things like that. So if they were big enough. So I think it was that, and then fire, just because fire is one of those things that, is terrifying. It's destructive.
We made this awful creature and now it breathes fire. Like, we're just gonna put that cherry on top.
It was just, I think it was a theory, and it was a theory that somebody took very seriously about how dragons came to be something featured so heavily in regional lore and myth.
Yeah.
Because it is inexplicable that it would come up, or at least it's very unusual that it would occur almost simultaneously in different parts of the world. You've got the Chinese dragon that they have at the Chinese New Year celebrations, as well as like George and the Dragon, all these other different kinds of dragons. It's very odd. I think about the same thing with the Kraken as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where that would come from, like a giant squid beast, or like Cthulhu, same sort of thing. It's kind of this relationship with the unknown. I'd be reluctant to call it fear, but I think probably in a lot of cases it's the powerful emotions, fear being one of them, that make us. It causes some animals or some properties like fire to be embedded in the way that we think, and they charm us. They're quite beguiling to us.
I think with things like, especially like sea creatures and stuff like that, like I think it's giving something you fear, or giving the unknown a face as well. Like, obviously, back in the day, ships would go missing, that kind of thing. And then it's more scary when you don't know what it is. That's why people are afraid of the dark, right? You don't know, you can't see what's there, and you don't know what's there. So it's almost more comforting to give it a face, and you've got something to blame, I guess. And I guess that's how like those kind of legends are born. And
do you design many monsters and creatures in your work then?
No, it's funny that I've used monsters and creatures as like a really baseline best way to describe it, but like a lot of the things that I work in are very, very like humanoid character based. But creatures is like a really good way, because I've looked at game art before and stuff like that, and that's a really good way to describe like the creative process and stuff. But yeah, I look at I work with a lot more like humanoid characters, whether it's storyboarding or design or animation.
I don't know if all children do it, but I know when I used to be younger, I would draw. If I was going to draw something, it was like either geometric shapes, just expanding, and like fractal shapes, or monsters. I was drawing monsters, and if I'm trying hard, I'm struggling a little to pull things from memory or specifics, but it was quite a long time ago. But I imagine it would be things that actually weren't too dissimilar from things that I just listed in myths and legends. I mean, now I'm thinking about Medusa, like the Gorgon Medusa, with the snakes in the hair. It's like all of these things are just, a lot of them in Greek mythology, it's just animal composites, like an amalgam of different species, like a chimera. I forget all the different ones. I mean, this is not where I expected to go, but that is the beauty of these conversations.
I know. I'm a bit like that. I was like, I didn't think I'd be coming on here talking about the Kraken, but
this is how my mind works mostly as well. It's just, and that's partly why I wanted to get out of having conversations with anybody. Is like it's a nice two-way exchange for both people, really, to kind of figure something out about themselves.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's most of the time is what I'm hoping to get out of it, something interesting, like an enjoyable, interesting conversation with somebody else that could go really anywhere, but to make me think of things that I hadn't realized about how I create something. I mean, my hope being that when somebody else listens to this conversation, that they have that same reaction and go, well, yeah, I wonder how I do X. Wonder what it is when I'm thinking Y.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me. To bring it back to animation, though, there was something that we kind of skirted a little bit around I wanted to kind of get back to, which is I had been curious about how you perceive movement differently to other people. Given it's your employ, it's what you do. Do you watch people, or do you watch animals move? Is that part of the referencing process for you?
Yeah, it's a very big part of it. And like, particularly when you're working for like a bigger project like TV or film, you'd be asked to take reference of, so like you've been given a scene and of like a character, I don't know, let's say they're cooking, and you get so much more visual information if you were to film yourself doing what the character's doing in that scene, rather than just sitting down and figuring it out. Like, it just gives you so much more information to work with. And yeah, you absolutely do look at motion completely differently. You study where somebody's weight would be. So where would they carry their weight when they're running, walking, doing something, get pushed over? Where's their weight going? You look at how when somebody would move, what are they leading with? Are they leading with their head, their arm, twisting their body? So you've got to think about all these things. Like you think about like anticipation and, you know, the kickoff of movement, stuff like that. So yeah, you absolutely study. You find yourself like watching people, maybe like the way they talk, and like if they use their hands loads or if they don't, or if where they're looking, what they do with their head. It's like anything that can make a character feel more alive, and anything you pick up from the real world. Like, yeah. Same with animals as well.
Is there something that springs to mind of, maybe a feature or a quality of something or someone that you've noticed recently?
this is hard because like we're in lockdown, so like I've been spending all my time in my flat.
I wondered if the new dog, maybe.
Oh, actually, yeah, the new dog. Our new dog.
Kind of feeding you now, but
yeah, when she actually, it's very cute when she's carrying something. I have a mini dachshund for anyone who doesn't know, and she can carry things differently, and you can tell like when she's proud, like she struts, like she's got a toy in her mouth and she will strut over just like, look what I've got, and that's the thing. Like everybody has a different walk and everybody walks differently when they're feeling something different. Like, is this a sad walk? Is this a proud walk? Is this, have they just lost their job? Have they got a new job? Those two different things, getting a job, losing a job, you would walk differently. And that's so powerful to recognize when you are an animator, because that can make or break your work. Particularly, we've got somebody who walks outside our apartment and he really swings his arms like to a level that is, in my opinion, quite cartoony. Like, but we see him walk past like every other day and he'll literally be like swinging them so far out in front, and it's like, what are you doing? You look like a spaghetti monster. Like, so that's one. There's been a few times where we've seen someone either fall over or walk, and you think, if I animated that, people would tell me it's wrong. People would tell me it looks wrong because it looks so silly.
Yeah, I've had that with looking at there's been sunsets and kind of landscapes before that I've seen and thought, this looks so unreal that if somebody were to paint this, nobody would believe it.
Oh, I've got actually, I don't know if anybody knows this. This is so random, but I found out that, okay, so the Windows 93 green hill background? Do you know what?
Yeah,
right. Yeah. That's a photograph that was completely unedited.
No.
Yeah, seriously. So the photographer, let me see if I can find his name, because it would do him injustice to not Windows 95 photographer.
A particular photo looked so saturated with colour.
Exactly, and it's his image. It was his photo. His camera, he did something with the lens, and he basically found this gorgeous hill in the middle of the Netherlands or whatever, got out his camera and took it. And obviously Microsoft found it a few years later and was like, oh my God, we have to have this random ass photo. Charles O'Rear, he's called. And he has like a portfolio, and he's got crazy saturated photographs that he's taken naturally. He's done no Photoshop with them. It's so cool. And that's one that's like, that can't be real, but it is. And yeah, that's a good example of like things you find in the wild that like is crazy. It's incredible that it's real,
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I wonder what you think about this, but is it in a lot of cases that people just expect it to be a generalization with what you do in animation or in design, really in general? I guess there's a concept in political theory called the Overton Window. And what that is like, it's a small window, it's a range of policies that would be acceptable given the current standards of people's opinions. And anything outside the Overton window are things that just seem too extreme right now. But then you could fast forward 15, 20 years or even 1 year, and the Overton window has moved, and now things that we would have never suggested now seem plausible. And that means they're in the Overton window. And I wonder how much of it in design relies on something similar to that. It's like there's ideas that we can stand given the kind of culture that we have, and there's ideas that we can, and there's ones that sit outside this Overton window, and we think, nah, that's just implausible. It's beyond belief. It's doing something that we just can't. No, it's too much. And then you've got like generalizations and things that maybe the art, like the real art, is kind of getting things at the edge of that window, pushing it just enough, kind of nudging at it.
I think there are a lot of generalizations in animation. that I've seen a few times before where people either think, oh, well, that's really easy to change, or there's a misconception of how animation would be edited. So, for example, I've seen a news report before when in the second, it was the second Wreck-It Ralph film that Disney brought out, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and there was a huge hullabaloo, I remember, about obviously the skin colour of the Princess Tiana had been changed for the advertisement compared to the real thing. And her skin had been lightened, and people were like, please change her back to her actual colour, please. And Disney put out a notice saying they were going to do that, and rightfully so. But I remember the Daily Mirror wrote an article saying how awful it was because that social justice warriors have demanded the change of Tiana's skin colour, and that the animators had to reanimate the whole film because of it. And it's like, no, they didn't. They had to just change. It's literally changing a palette. Like, you've completely misinformed all your readers. Like, they didn't have to reanimate anything. It's literally a texture change, but because it's CG, like, and even if it was hand drawn, you'd have to just change the paint color. It's nothing to do with animation. It was so annoying. It annoyed me so much, and
the shock and the scandal sells, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, people were getting everyone in the comments. Don't obviously never read the comments, but like everyone in the comments was like, "I can't believe they've had to force Disney's hand," and it's just like, come on. It's an editing change. It's so minor. But on the other hand, there was. So you've heard of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, right? I'm guessing. Again, this is huge in animation history because that trailer, the first trailer for the Sonic the Hedgehog film, got brought out, and right, his design was a hot mess. Like, okay, like it was not good, especially if you're a Sonic fan as well. Like, that was definitely like producers taking control of how this is going to look, and like, oh, we want it to be like Alvin and the Chipmunks level of detail, and it just so Uncanny Valley, so very bad, big mistake.
It was quite malformed, wasn't it? It was quite grotesque.
Yeah. So, but that has gone down in animation history because the director came out and said, okay, you don't like it, we're going to change it. And it got mixed reviews because a huge problem in the animation industry is overtime and what is called crunch time as well, when you're nearing a deadline and you are like going 200% effort to get your work done and stuff like that. And now that changing a character, like the model, that's a huge change because that can affect like the animation, and some people probably had shots to redo. Some people probably had work that they had done for nearly 3 months straight, and they get back and it's like, cool, you've got to redo it now because do you remember the rig it's now been updated, and sometimes you can't translate it. You can't perfectly translate it to the new character model. So that was a huge, that is a huge change. That did mean that reanimation probably had to happen. But yeah, the Wreck-It Ralph film and the Sonic movie are like two good examples of when the audience does not understand how much or little work goes into changing, changing what you've already been given. But in respect to the Sonic movie, I think it was a positive change. I do think it looked a lot better, the changes they did made, and I think it's amazing that the art team, the animation team, rigging team, everyone just worked so hard to change that. Like that's not. This isn't me criticizing that they shouldn't have changed it. I think it was good. They pulled back the release date as well, and I think that was a wise decision because I think that would have been too much to do in the time left that they had to finish the film.
I guess with those sorts of things as well, feedback has changed a lot. Certainly the rapidity of it comes so much quicker and easier than it ever has done before with social media. You can't post a billboard in the past and you might expect to hear from it if somebody can be bothered to write a letter. But again, it's that thing of if you're saved so much time and it's so easy to post something, especially something negative, hey, why not do it? You're almost behind this this veil of anonymity online as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. You can
it's
slag
quite
them off.
dehumanizing. It's an odd process to go through because all you're really being given are things that you would never be given in real life. Just letters on a screen. That's how dialogue happens now, and it's so. I mean, it's no wonder that dialogue is so difficult, and people find it hard to do. Really, it's no wonder at all. To kind of bring that back round to generalizations, then, I was with generalizations. We were speaking about your dog and the things that you'd noticed about your dog in particular and how it moved. Do you think there are generalizations that you can draw that you can see and say, actually, no, there's a better way of framing this question is, do people express emotions in the same way?
Ooh. No, I don't think so. No. Yeah, everyone particularly in like facial mechanics, like everyone smiles differently, everyone has a different laugh, everyone, so stuff like that, I think. Yeah, if you animated 3 characters next to each other with the same laugh or the same smile or the same, sad expression, it would look creepy. So I think, yeah, to in a more technical level, thinking of like visually, everyone has different like ways of expressing emotion. But yeah, and I think more mentally as well, people can like compute emotion differently as well. And I think thinking about that when you animate or create something or draw something is useful to know as well, because you always need to know what is motivating this character, what is this character thinking about right now, why are they sad, how does this sadness affect them, and how do they deal with it, and that's important to know because it's important to the story that you're trying to tell. So yeah, I think we do. The answer to that question is yes. Like we do. It's all. We all handle emotion very differently.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between what a person presents and
Yes.
what a person is going on behind that as well. I mean, it's not impossible to imagine somebody who's crying and very upset. Maybe they've been to a funeral, but also at some point being kind of compelled to laugh at something.
Yeah.
Or at least compelled to smile by a fond memory. You can have those two things at the same time. It's like the context, I suppose, is more relevant than you would think.
Yeah, that's so important to like storytelling when it comes to something so visual as animation. It's the same thing, like what is motivating this character to cry, and if they think of a fond memory, do they cry more? Does it make them cry out in absolute agony, or do they laugh a little and wipe away a tear? It's yeah, and how it's all yeah, really important when it comes to animation.
Well, I've been thinking when I introduced this idea of this Overton window, which is not really used with creativity. Nobody really uses it that way in anything other than in politics. But nevertheless, I'm going to stick with it. What I'm thinking of with the Overton window is like inside of that window is things that are kind of consistent. So say with smiling, there is something about smiling that's consistent from one person to another, regardless of who's doing the smiling. There's something the same. It's like the curl of the lips or the degree that the teeth are shown and so on and so forth. Maybe you would know more about than I would. Outside the Overton window, though, there are things that are inconsistent with those general things and are kind of signature to a person. And sometimes those things can be so extreme that like you might observe that smile and say, nobody smiles like that. Nobody does that. Or somebody might have such a kind of iconoclastic smile that it just stands out from the crowd. And it's like, that's still a smile, but I've never seen anybody smile that way, but it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying there? So there's just this kind of range of things, like in musical terms, maybe you would say it was a genre, and outside of it, you have people still with like doing something with that genre, but doing something a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah.
In smiles, it's like everybody's doing smiles in the same way. There's a base rate of smiles that are consistent, but then there's these just like small little things, the little details that just set it apart from all of the others. I guess this is probably quite a intricate thing to ask, but like how do you get those intricacies into, say, a character when you're trying to have them smile? Like, do you think about it? Is it conscious, or does it just happen? Does it occur?
It must, like, I think it's both. Like, if you think, should this character have like a signature look or smile or walk, yeah. Or sometimes it does just happen where like maybe you draw something, whether it be the way they smile or the way their face is constructed. Sometimes you draw one like a happy accident and it's like, oh, that really works, actually, I'm going to stick with that, so I think it's both. Definitely, I think the Overton window can work in ways, how I was saying, where you'll watch someone walk out in the open and you look at them and think, if I animated that, I would get told off for doing a very unrealistic walk. I think that can be in animation as well, where sometimes people are just too weird and it's like, well, if I animate that, it will look like Uncanny Valley and it just won't work, because there's only so much that your brain, because obviously animation is creating the illusion of life, right? You are telling the audience, like, this character is alive, this story is real, this is happening, so if you go too weird and if the character starts looking too odd, your brain will start making that disconnect, like, oh, this is looking weird and this isn't real, this is, so it breaks the illusion. So I guess that's a similar thing with this Overton window stuff.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking that everything inside the Overton window are the kind of mundane stereotypes, and everything outside of it are the things that are kind of like, they're the things that make something seem real. Earlier on, you said it was like, it would be robotic to just have kind of these very basic, everyone walks the same way, and it's like you're just having these kind of boring tropes rather than adding personality to it. And it's like everything outside the Overton window, maybe that's where personality comes in. It actually might be worth clarifying, though. You use the term Uncanny Valley. I'm not sure everybody would be familiar with that, so I wondered if you could just explain what that is.
Well, Uncanny Valley, at least in an animation sense, is when something like it looks almost real. It's like your brain is saying, well, it's moving and it's alive and it's talking, but like, so it's doing everything that a human would when it talks and speaks and moves, but it's like, but it's also really weird looking and it's making me feel weird. So my brain's telling me this is definitely like a character who's moving, but like it's freaking me out for some reason. It's kind of the same way a lot of people feel about Play-Doh and sculpted animation, like Wallace and Gromit and old-fashioned films that used to have skeletons. When they move, but they move just a little, like the frames are jittery and it's a little bit weird and it doesn't make you feel safe. I think that's a good way to describe Uncanny Valley, at least for me, in a visual sense.
Yeah, I came to the term through artificial intelligence research. That's where I've come across it. But they have the same sort of thing. Have you ever seen the film Ex Machina?
No, I haven't.
Oh, yeah. That is a fantastic film. I'll not add any spoilers to it, but the gist of it is that it's about a very intelligent person trying to develop the first artificial intelligence that can pass the Turing test. I don't know if you've heard of the Turing test.
No.
It's Alan Turing, so the guy who, there was a movie with Benedict Cumberbatch played him, the Enigma game, I think it was called. Alan Turing was a mathematician, and he developed a kind of, I think it was like code cracking technology, and made the first computer, really. The first artificial computer in World War II. anyway, so the Turing test is based on a paper that he wrote, which was about how it's kind of talking about Uncanny Valley without using those terms. I don't think he uses them anyway. And it's how something artificial can pass the test of are you human? And it's really just a paper about that question. Is like, what would a thing have to do to be able to pass the test of being human? Like, how can you tell? And it's a funny thing because, like, in philosophy, like when philosophers talk about the Turing test and artificial intelligence and other things like that, there's a point at which you would just not be able to tell that it was artificial. And it's just all of a sudden it's like you can't. The difference between like me speaking to you and me speaking to the software version in the artificial still chassis, like a robot version of Lauren, would be practically indistinguishable. I mean, maybe you don't come across that that description of Uncanny Valley too much, but I suppose you're talking about the same thing for the same reasons when you're doing design. There's a point where it just seems disquieting because it's either not close enough to what the norms are, things in the Overton window, or it's gone too far past it.
Yeah, I think definitely that's basically what you're trying to do in animation and I guess filmmaking in general is like you're suspending like your audience's disbelief, and you have to it's like it's whenever you watch a film and you care about the characters, it's because you're feeling that they're real, you know. And if you start to step into the Uncanny Valley, you start to step away from, well, I don't care about this character because it's not a real character, because it looks weird, you know what I mean, because it's freaking me out. It's exactly the reason why people hated the first design of the Sonic the Hedgehog film, because it just was weird, man. Like, it doesn't make you want to feel emotion about it, because it's like, that's not real. That like might as well be a painted rock or something like that. You know what I mean? It's your brain just not making that connection. But yeah, like it's the same people. Loads of people cry at Coco, but if you tell them, well, it's just a bunch of polygons moving on screen, you know, why are you getting upset? And it's like, well, because to you, you know, to me, they're real characters, and you know, the really sad scenes feel real because they're animated so well. Like they're convincing, and yeah, I think that's definitely important in things that are visual.
Well, that's the thing that comes up in artificial intelligence research. That's the thing that comes up all the time, is the question of what's real.
Yeah.
Is they would say, like, you can feel empathy towards this kind of facsimile person, this robot stood right in front of you, and you can feel a certain way about it, and you can see all of these cues, and it'll have a psychological effect on you, whether you like it or not. But can you say it's real or not? What does it mean to say it's real or not? You're having the same experience as you would be if it wasn't a proxy for a real in kind of air quotes person. Like there would be like between pod person Lauren and Lauren, like I would have the same experience if you acted the same way. There's no meaningful distinction there. And you said about like kind of pixels on screens. How do you empathize with pixels on screens and polygons and geometric shapes and colors? It's like, well, that's all you're really doing anyway in real life.
Yeah.
On a day-to-day basis. Like, I am just interacting with particles and like little lumps of matter just blobbing around in space. Like, that's all that's really happening. And you kind of put those two side by side and the distinctions start to feel quite arbitrary. At least for me, it does anyway. It seems to be a little bit meaningless. I think the thing that we latch onto though is those things. It's the emotions. It's the way that it makes us feel. In animation, I wonder, it kind of struck me when you were talking about the dog, about anthropomorphization. It's a hard word to say.
Yeah.
So kind of seeing, like, making a person or seeing human qualities in non-human things. So in animation, for example, if you were drawing dogs and cartoon characters who are from a different species, or monsters and things like that, but having human qualities. And I feel like, do you feel as if maybe it's nothing to do with pixels and particles, and it's everything to do with with seeing a human in somebody else, like personality.
It's funny because one of the animators from Lady and the Tramp talked about this, and they were explaining that they had to obviously cartoonize dogs to make the audience be able to care about their story, and he was basically saying, if you took the real Lady and the Tramp, and keep their head shape, their eye shape, nose, mouth, and bring it into a real life setting, they would look so freaky. You know what I mean? They don't actually look like real dogs when you think about it. But because they've been caricaturized to have human features and more readable eyes and stuff like that, it makes the audience relate to them more and care about them more, and feel like they feel that they have feelings to with these characters more. I think this is a very similar argument. Basically, I am notorious for hating Disney remakes. Okay, I love Disney. It's my dream. I'd love to work for them one day. I love Disneyland, but I will never agree that Disney remakes were a good decision. I think...
Is this the 3D ones that they've remade? Lion King and Jungle Book?
Make them look real, make them look live actiony. And technically, they have made great technical films. I think The Lion King had a huge budget when it came to CFX animation. They really pulled off making a convincing real lion, okay? But if you watch Lion King remake compared to the Lion King real thing, the original Lion King to me is so much more entertaining, and it's so much more emotional and heartfelt. It's the same reason why people will watch Mufasa's death and cry every time, because you can see in Simba's face this absolute agony, and he's calling out for help, and then Scar arrives and he is distraught, and you can see it. But obviously in the new film, in the remake, it doesn't read as well, because you are basically staring at a lion cub with vacant eyes, because real animals have very small glassy eyes, which is that doesn't mean they can't feel emotion, but you certainly can't read it as well. They're predatory animals. You're not meant to be able to read emotion from them. So it doesn't hit as hard in the remake. Nothing really does. Everything falls a little bit flat. And I think a big part of it is because they went so far in on the detail, to the point where they took a lot of the human element out of it, and the human emotion out of it, which was, I think, detrimental to that film. So I have completely forgotten what the question was, but it's the same thing where it's sometimes you have to add human elements to something for it to feel to make that connection, especially in animation.
Yeah, you are putting those human qualities in whatever it is you're supposed to be empathizing with. I think that's kind of what a narrative, in most cases, the stories are largely the same in any film. They're ticking the same kind of boxes for you emotionally and psychologically. The actual characters' designs are there to serve another purpose, as I see it.
Yeah,
I always think with cartoons as well the cartoons versus realism, they're trying to do something different, and I think we're dabbling with realism and seeing how far we can push technology, and that's really what we're trying to do, is push technology.
That's
more
the
than
thing.
what we were trying to do before.
Yeah, I think I do think Disney is, with the remakes, are trying to just show off how much they can render. Do you know what I mean? Look, we made this lion with about 3 million hair particles, and it's that's great. And it is amazing. And there are artists on that film that worked super hard and did an amazing job. Brilliant. But just because something looks pretty doesn't make it a good film, and it doesn't make it entertaining. You've made a cool image.
Very difficult, or it must be very challenging to anthropomorphize an animal, because if you're trying to be real at the same time and portray something as real and as accurate, literally, as it can be, then it loses all of those human qualities because lions don't have human qualities.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't do that. And neither does any other species.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who find... do you remember the film Cats versus Dogs or Cats and Dogs? Where there's like there's a little talking beagle in it. There are a lot of kids who find that really freaky because it's just a normal dog, obviously being filmed, standing there, but they've comped in a moving mouth to make him look like he's talking like a human. But because dogs don't do that, it can come across as quite weird or scary.
Yeah.
But if that was in the style of Lady and the Tramp, that wouldn't feel as weird because the whole world looks like that. The whole world has dogs that have eyes as big as eggs. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter, and you can read their expressions clearly, and so.
Yeah, people know what to do with a cartoon because I think if you think of something like a caricature that you would get on the market on holiday or something like that, like a caricature is a kind of cartoon that's just like the obvious qualities of something are stretched and exaggerated, like. The hyperbole is astounding. It's like pushed so far. So like chins are like stretched. And in cartoon, as I see it, it's doing the same kind of things. It's not stretching them as ridiculously.
Yes.
But it's still making things that are observable that maybe we couldn't intellectualize and say, oh yeah, I look at people's eyes when I'm talking to them and it makes me feel this certain way. We wouldn't really do that. We would usually just take it for granted. But I feel like cartoons serving the purpose of bringing those things to the forefront and kind of tugging on those things. It actually reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen The Trip with Rob Brydon and Steve Coogan.
No, I haven't.
There's a quite well-known scene from it. It's great anyway, but one of the standout scenes from that is both of them comparing their impressions of Michael Caine, so trying to do his and recreate his voice, like the tone and the quality and the way that he speaks, like the cadences and so on. And they both have different portrayals of it. I forget which way around, but I'm pretty sure Rob Brydon does one that's kind of ticking the boxes of all the stereotypes. So in context of what I'm saying, it's like the cartoon version of it. It's all of the most immediate, observable qualities of Michael Caine's voice, the low-hanging fruit, I guess. And Steve Coogan criticizes it and says, no, you're just doing the stereotype. Michael Caine's voice is actually like this, and he does this or that. If you listen to it, he does this and that. And he's right. He does. Like Steve Coogan's, I think his impression is better, but it sounds more like Michael Caine, but it's not as appealing.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't.
It's not as appealing, and it's not as obvious that it's Michael Caine when he's doing it. In fact, it sounds to most ears like a bad Michael Caine impression.
Right. Yeah. But it's actually more on point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
it's this thing with expectations there where we can only really, there's only certain things that can hit us in certain ways, like certain qualities about another thing. We don't pay that much attention.
Yeah, I think that's basically what readability is in animation, where like particularly in like storyboarding and animation as well, if you pose a character, so if the camera, like my camera right now to you is in front of me, so just a straight on shot, and if I'm holding, let's say, a present and it's in front of me, all you are reading, my silhouette, is just my head and my shoulders. You don't really know what's going on, but it's so much clearer readability wise if I was holding it to the left of me and the silhouette of the present, like the bow and everything, is out in the open against the background. That is what would be in animation considered a stronger pose, because it's more readable to the audience, and the audience gets it quicker. And it's the same thing with the Michael Caine expression interpretation. Because he's hitting the more obvious points of Michael Caine. Any Joe Blogs listening would be like, oh yeah, that's a Michael Caine impression, cool. But the more detailed one sounds more boring, and it doesn't feel as readable because there's so much noise and detail going on, and sometimes the clear route is the better one to to be able to tell it to the audience, if that makes sense.
It does. I think if I'm just gonna kind of flog a dead horse a little bit with this Overton window idea, this is just making me think about that. It's like the edges of the window, like that's where the interesting stuff is. Like you can go outside of it really easily, and in the case of a very factually correct impression of Michael Caine, you're outside the Overton window, and it means that most people miss how good it is. And I think it's the same with music. I think it's the same with design.
Yeah. Unless you're Michael Caine's like sister or something. Like you know him.
Yeah.
You know everything he would say and the way he would say it. But yeah, if you're just doing his like little quips that he has, everyone's gonna get it because they've heard it all before in most of his films. So
yeah, and it's like not everybody's trained to listen to voice in the same way that an impressionist does. And I guess that's a nice analog to what you do. Like not everybody's trained to look at the world in terms of animation. And so when you're animating something, you've got to take readability into account and think, well, what does the average person actually see? Like what will they take from this? I feel like Lion King is like a masterstroke in that regard. The original Lion King, it's like it just ticks all the boxes of like to make you feel a certain way, like the eyes doing certain things and the expressions on the faces and the story itself. And I agree. In the remake, those things were not there. There was something just not quite right. I watched it and I was like, this looks very lovely. And same with Jungle Book, actually. I watched them both and thought, they look lovely. They look great. Like I could see that, and it's like very believable to look at. But then I guess it's in the uncanny valley. There was something there that was just like, but it just doesn't feel
right. Does it? Yeah.
It's really difficult to hit that. I think we've come to a natural conclusion.
Yes.
On that.
Yes.
So where can people find your work?
Oh, so I have a website, which is bimmling.com, BIMMLING, and I'm basically the same handle on Instagram and Twitter as well. So you can find me there.
Okay.
Go look at all my drawings.
Yeah, your drawings are very good.
Oh, thank you.
So compliments where it's due. I try not to fawn over my guests too much, but you are a guest for a good reason. It's because I admire your work. So
oh, thank you very much.
So thanks. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed speaking to you. And let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been lovely.